Julia Lo Bue-Said, Chief Executive of the Advantage Travel Partnership, the UK's largest network of independent travel agents. And I began by asking Lisa for the latest on the situation.
If you visualise what's happened, everyone sort of wanted to go on holiday at the same time because of the half term and the Jubilee, and now everyone's coming back. So there have been cancellations from several airports today, and that does include departures and arrivals. So there have absolutely been people stuck at other airports across Europe, particularly trying to get back in the country in a reverse almost of what we had in the run-up to this situation.
Julia, it must be so stressful, especially families perhaps had a nightmare getting out of the country in the first place, queuing, delays, cancellations, and now finding that they can't get back. They're probably going to get the kids to school and so on.
Yeah, it's so incredibly frustrating, particularly for an industry that's been shut down for 2 years. The one thing we're all desperate to do is to make sure that travellers can get where they want to be and get back when they want to get back. So incredibly disappointing. It is worth pointing out that in the vast majority of cases, we are seeing flights leaving the UK and coming back. So millions of people are travelling. Of course, that is no consolation if you're one of those passengers that are stuck on one of the flights, unable to get home.
And Lisa, we're now hearing that the disruption may continue with Easyjet saying that they're planning to cancel more flights.
Well, the good news about cancelling more flights, if they're saying that now, is they're talking about, in the future and the near future going forward. They're doing that to mitigate the last-minute cancellations, which have been even more hideous for people. But I think the thing to bear in mind is, and exactly what Julia said, I always say that, we talk about the negative on the news because it's true, it's happening. We have to report on it. But the vast majority of people are getting away. It doesn't take away how hideous it is if your flight is cancelled. But the other thing is the travel industry are working really, really hard to rectify this. And there's been a lot of discussion with the government whose fault it was, whose fault wasn't it, that sort of thing. I think that doesn't really matter now, particularly as a consumer. We don't really care whose fault it was. We just want it fixed. And everyone is working so hard to try and make this better because the travel industry are losing money, offering refunds and compensation and trying to get other people onto different flights. And also the concern now that, they're going to lose consumer confidence. So people will start cancelling holidays unnecessarily, really, because as we've both said, the majority of flights are going ahead.
And Julia, for your members, the travel agents are pretty much in the hands of the airlines, aren't they? I mean, if the airlines suddenly turn around and say that they can't take your passengers, there's not a huge amount that you can do other than pressurise them to try and sort something out for those whose plans are being disrupted.
That's right. So they are, working very hard with the airlines to make sure that, one, their customers, don't suffer any further disruption. And the great thing about what the travel agent community can do is they can really make sure consumers, if one carrier that they're on has cancelled a flight, they can actually put them on alternative flights quite seamlessly. So they have the ability to do that. So lots of disruption, lots of moving parts here that the agents are really working hard to try and get together. But ultimately, they're in the best position to make sure they can get customers on an alternative flight and make sure, particularly when it comes to compensation, they can get all the compensation that is required that they are entitled to as well.
Lisa, as you rightly say, most people don't really care who's to blame for this. They just want to get away and they don't want the stress of having to worry about whether they're going to be able to and whether they're going to be able to get back, especially after all the difficulties we've had of the last 2 years of the pandemic. But what is the cause of this? We've seen the government very squarely laying the blame at the foot of the airlines, saying they should have got their act together. They should have been hiring staff in advance of this. And airlines that did do that haven't had the same disruption, have they?
No, I mean, that's it. It is all about people having left the industry during the pandemic, whether that was voluntarily or being made redundant, and it just doesn't seem that we've been able to replace those people quick enough. And of course, when there are people off sick, that's when we're struggling to replace them. And this has happened across, it's not just the airline, we've got the double bubble really, because it's not just the airlines, it's happening at the airports, isn't it? We've had the ground handling staff issue, and that's been the main cause of those queues that we're talking about at Manchester in particular. at Bristol, at other airports. We've had those huge queues. Dublin, which you saw last week, was absolutely hideous. Lots of people missed their flights. So, there's been just many, many little reasons, including the staffing, on the ground and in the air, that have just sort of added up to this. On top of that, we're dealing with Brexit for the first time, really, with people travelling in higher and higher numbers since the pandemic. And that is also causing a problem on the way back into the country. I've had reports of people missing their flights in Lisbon Airport, in Amsterdam Airport, because of the queues, 2-3 hour queues to get through passport control, because everyone needs their passport stamped if people are flying back home here. So it just seems to be like a whole cacophony of events. And in fact, Easyjet are talking about operational issues now, in inverted commas. That's what everyone's saying, because it just seems to sum it up, general operational issues.
Julia, I mean, it does really affect public confidence, doesn't it? I'm actually due to go away shortly myself on a holiday that's been delayed and rebooked and cancelled goodness knows how many times over about the last year. And I'm already thinking, perhaps I'd rather just get on a train and go to Norfolk. And there is the danger for your industry, isn't there, that people will start to think like that. Good news perhaps for the British travel industry.
It is very, very concerning, as I said before, especially because for an industry that's been shut down for 2 years. You can understand exactly why you would feel that way and why consumers feel that way. I flew to Spain last week. I was through Stansted Airport very quickly. I had no issues at all. And in the vast majority of cases, flights will be fine. But of course, it's very difficult to give that reassurance. I think the advice I would give is, if you are travelling, obviously if flights are cancelled last minute, which are far and few between, there isn't a huge amount we can do about that. But when you're at the airport, go prepared. There may be a bit of a queue, depends on when you're travelling. Make sure you've got all your documentation. Whilst restrictions are easing, there are still restrictions for some countries, and just make sure there's nothing that you are possibly doing to cause any issues at the airport that can get you through as quickly as possible. That's some of the advice that we can give. But we've got to see how this pans out. I mean, hopefully between now and the peak summer period, we've got a bit of a calm period as the half-term pressure comes away, and we can really start to make sure all the right parts are in the right place. And recruitment starts to ramp up a lot as well. So hopefully we'll be in a much better place in the next few weeks.
Lisa, I was talking to the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, on Times Radio's Sunday Politics show yesterday. He rejected the call from Michael O'Leary of Ryanair to bring in the troops to sort out some of the checks at the airports. He also rejected the idea that's been put forward by some in the industry that visa restrictions should be lifted to allow in more foreign workers. But are there signs that the airlines and the airports are taking steps to rectify this, to get their act together, to get more staff in place, so that when we come to the summer break in just over a month's time, that we don't see these problems repeated, but perhaps even worse?
Yes, absolutely. They're doing everything they can. And Manchester airports have those huge queues. Apparently, they've got 300 people waiting to start work, but the industry have been calling upon the government to process this a little bit quicker, and Grant Shapps has said no. Again, bless Michael O'Leary, you've got to love him, bring in the army. I don't think that's going to happen. I'm hoping we don't need to bring in the army just yet, but no, they're just working as fast as they can to employ people and to attract people in the industry. But, when you think about it, it's a glamorous job in some ways on the airlines. You get a lot of perks. But the ground handling staff, it's not such a glamorous job. It's not very well paid. It's unsociable hours. And actually, many people have felt, well, actually, I'm not necessarily going to go back to that. On top of that, back to Brexit again, something like about 30% of people employed in airports pre-Brexit were from the EU citizens. So, that's had an effect. I couldn't tell you how many have gone home, but presumably some of them have. And that's exactly what they were saying about asking Grant Shapps to hurry through. They did something similar with lorry drivers, didn't they, at one point, to sort of, slightly alter the immigration rules so they can process more people who want to work here. But he said no. And, I can foresee some more infighting between the government and the travel industry, unfortunately.
And Julia, have you got any confidence that things are going to be improving in the coming months, or are we going to have to resign ourselves to more of these difficulties and perhaps prepare ourselves for delays at the airport as we travel, hopefully, over the next few months?
I honestly think we're already seeing signs that things are improving. Things have eased slightly. I think, unfortunately, when you've got a combination of a busy half term with a Jubilee, pressure on the system, pent up demand, unfortunately, it creates a bit of a perfect storm. But we're definitely seeing right across the ecosystem, lots of moving parts, really working hard and actually engaging constructively, I have to say, with government to make sure we are in the best possible position come the summer break. And nobody wants flight disruptions. The industry definitely doesn't want flight disruptions. So we're all doing everything we can at every part of the process to make sure that we can, have customers look forward to their holidays without any pressures at the airport, and that they can go ahead and enjoy their break.
Well, that was Julia Lo Bue-Said of Advantage Travel and the travel journalist Lisa Francesca Nand speaking to me just a little earlier here on Times Radio.